Welcome back to another Pirkei Avot text explication video with me, your host, Rabbi Drew. We are now on the 20th text in the 5th chapter, and this is actually, seems to be 3 different texts sort of packaged all together. And we'll see you'll understand what I mean by this. So this text starts off with Yehudah ben Tema, which strikingly is a name. That's right, a named sage in this 5th chapter, which is the first time we've encountered a particular name of someone making a statement here in this chapter. While commonplace in the first 4 chapters, this is the first time we've encountered it here in the 5th chapter. So here is what Yehudah ben Tema, or Yehudah, or Judah, son of Tema, says. Heve az kanamer, v'ka kanesher, v'ratz katzvi, v'gibor ka'ari la'asot ritzon avicha shebashamayim. Be bold as a leopard, and swift as an eagle, fleet as a gazelle, and brave or strong like a lion, to do the will of your Father who is in heaven. Lot to unpack here, Really, it almost seems, this is clearly one line. This is one statement that Judah, son of Tema, is articulating here. But it kind of seems like sort of 2 parts, right? The first part has these 4 different descriptors corresponding to different animals, and then the sort of conclusion that it should all be leading up to. Now, of these, in thinking about these 4, these bold like a leopard, be bold like it's interesting. We can think about these animals, the descriptors, and then of course connecting what is this all supposed to lead to. It's actually kind of interesting because the animals here, the leopard, the eagle, the gazelle, and the lion, it seems to be that these characteristics that Yehudah, son of Tema, is pointing out here are really the features of each of these animals, the strengths of these animals. And the highlighting how we know these animals. The bold like a leopard, I guess a leopard is bold. Be as light like an eagle. Be as fleet or fast as a gazelle, and strong like a lion. That these are really, they're paragons of these, they're exemplars of these characteristics amongst the animal world. So we're supposed to try to draw these sort of characteristics or see them as exemplars for how we should be acting, which is interesting because without the final piece, which we'll get to, without the final piece of this statement, one might have thought simply just be like these things. Be strong, be bold, be fast, be fleet. We could have understood those just to be good sort of, strong physical people. But it's not just about physical stuff, although the physical, we'll see, but ultimately to do the will, to do the will of your Father who is in heaven. That all these things are good, they're great and all, but really they should be motivated or directed towards fulfilling the will of God. And so it's interesting once we use the end part and really put it back in to these four animals, these 4 characteristics, because then we think about how might that play out, right? The boldness like a leopard. What does boldness do? Well, it enables us to really, in spite of maybe choices that we might decide that would be against God's will, that we should be bold and really maybe perhaps even to do things that we might not have done were we not so bold. Be as light, right? Be as light as an eagle. That basically both this and the ratz katzvi, the running like a gazelle, being swift, being quick to carry these things out, and then of course being strong like a lion. That the physical strength enables us to do these things. Now, it also is interesting, we're depositing the end back into all these 4 descriptors, but what's really fascinating is even just the first word of his statement, which is heve, be. Meaning, not everybody is like this. We aren't always like this, but it's certainly something to aspire to try to use these, to basically use our physical strength, our quickness, our abilities, and even the boldness to do these things to really fulfill, so to speak, God's will. Of course, what is God's will? I think Yehudah ben Tema would say that it's basically the various commandments that we are supposed to fulfill. So that is the first out of the three sort of texts that are all packaged into this 20th text here in the 5th chapter. The second is Hu Haya Omer, that he used to say. So this is again another statement of Yehudah ben Tema, another statement of Judah son of Tamas, and this is a phrase that we've encountered in the first handful of chapters, that certain sages would say something and then they would also have a commonly or frequently, apparently repeated saying of theirs, or at least certainly what they're known for. And this is a lot briefer. So this is what he would say: Az panim le Gehinom, voshet panim le Gan Eden. Pretty simple. That the arrogant go down to Gehinom, and those who are, well, literally sort of like blushing, voshet panim, that they're sort of more, I guess not necessarily shameful, but they have the blushing. They're the opposite of arrogant, I guess. They're more modest, as it were, and they go to Gan Eden, the Garden of Eden. Now, it's interesting in thinking about the connections of the words here, because we have Gehinom, which we have previously encountered in a previous text. Actually, the previous text that we encountered, the 19th text in this 5th chapter, that this is something that the disciples of Balaam the wicked inherit. So we literally previously encountered this place. The Garden of Eden, we encounter it in the early part of the book of Genesis. That's sort of, I don't know, we might describe it as Edenic, right? Very much like Eden. It's fairly paradisial, right? We have so much food around, so that they are supposed to get that in the afterlife, that those who are more, I don't want to say ashamed, but certainly those who are the opposite of arrogant. Meanwhile, the arrogant go to this Gehinom place. Okay. Also thinking about the words, by the way, the Az Panim, it's interesting because he uses the word Az in the previous statement of his, in which he said, be Az Kanamer, be as bold as a leopard. But here it's not just simply Az, sort of boldness, just sort of in the abstract, but it's specifically bold of face. And this boldness of face, you can be Az Panim or Boshet Panim. And this boldness of face is really in the face, like being like bold in the face of others, but arrogant is really a good descriptor for it, or a good translation for it. So it's very simple. Also talking about sort of the afterlife, and just really, it's interesting because this is not something that is specific. It is not particular to the Jewish people. It's something that is, he's saying in general, that people who are arrogant, or it's more than just arrogant, I almost want to say like impudent or sort of up, I don't know, whatever it is, it's not good, and they go to a bad place, whereas the people who are more humble, so to speak, get Garden of Eden. So now we have those two statements of his. But then it seems to conclude, and this is not really, it seems out of place, it does not seem to be part of a statement. It really seems to be sort of almost like a concluding prayer of sorts, a brief, a terse prayer, to be sure, but a prayer nonetheless. Yehiratzon melfanecha Adonai Eloheinu shetivneh irecha bimhira v'yaminu v'sein cholkinu b'sorasecha. May it be the will, O Lord our God, that your city be rebuilt speedily in our days, and set our portion in the studying of your Torah. Now, this is not, it's not contextualized or otherwise framed by a particular rabbinic statement. It is most certainly not part of this second statement of Yehudah ben Tamas here. It just seems to be inserted. Perhaps at some time this could have really closed out and otherwise have concluded this 5th chapter of Pirkei Avot, and actually not even just the 5th chapter, but probably the entirety of the 5th chapter. Although, as we'll see, there's still more to come in this 5th chapter. We have just a few more texts in this 5th chapter, although, who knows, maybe at some point this could have been the stopping point of the 5th chapter, and those were added on later. But we have what we have, and this prayer, I said prayer, and you might have been wondering, well, where's the Baruch Atah? That sort of the opening formula for blessings that we are typically used to. But the truth is, this opening, Yehi ratzon milfanecha Adonai Eloheinu, the may it be willful from before you, the Lord our God, is actually a very common rabbinic expression of a prayer of hoping that something should happen, that we ask, may it be your will, God, that this happens, or and something along those lines. So that opening formula is actually a common sort of an expression of a blessing, even if it's not the formal Baruch Atah, that sort of opening. So, but the content of what this is asking is that your city, and not just Jerusalem, sort of like as we have now, just literally Jerusalem, but specifically really like the temple, right? The temple in Jerusalem, that specifically. And the other part of this request is also that that our portion be in God's Torah, that it's not specifically that we're to be included in the Torah, but that we are able to study and otherwise endeavor in the studying of the Torah. So this is the 20th text here in the 5th chapter, and stay tuned for more as we continue on and begin to start wrapping up this chapter. So that's what I got. Thank you so much for watching.